Hello everyone, and welcome to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andy Bentley, and I am your host. And the Commander's Forge is an area for me to talk about magic, Commander, and essentially anything else that I want to, as I try and let this be a place where we can have an open discussion about gaming and mental health in gaming. Now, today, I just want to talk about some things that I have going on behind the scenes. Namely, on Twitter, I put out a feeler to see if I could commission somebody to change up my logo. Not that I don't like my logo now, I just think it might be time for something a little different. Namely, I had this logo that I have commissioned by my cousin a while ago. And I didn't think to try and tie it into a card. Well, I was going through some cards the other day while I was looking for cards that will inevitably lead to the second half of this podcast. And I flipped by Nazan, Reverend Bladesmith. He's a 5/4 cat artificer for 4, a green and a white. When he enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an equipment card and reveal it. If you reveal a card named Hammer of Nazan this way, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. Whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, you may tap target creature defending player controls. Honestly, I might make a green-white equipment deck with that. I'm not entirely sure. But the art is a Leonin in armor working a forge. Hammer in one hand, forging a magical sword in the other. So essentially what I'm looking to have commissioned is replace the Leonin with my likeness, change the hammer to a different style of hammer, possibly a Colossus hammer, and then change the sword that's getting hammered on into one of the Sword ofs, either Sword of Feast and Famine or Fire and Ice. Those are kind of what I'm thinking right now. And I haven't reached out to too many artists yet, but eventually I will find someone that would be able to do it for me. That's one thing I kind of have going behind the scenes. And then the other is just trying to consolidate my deck lists online. Namely, going in and deleting ones that have either been taken apart or like swapped into other decks and getting things updated. And so far, I think I still have like 2 more I need to either delete or change, and I've got like 5 or 6 to add. And it's going, it's just I don't want to spend, all day trying to do that and just completely mentally wipe myself out. So instead I do like 2 decks this day, 2 decks this day, and I kind of have this unwritten rule for my deck lists. If it's a new deck, I don't put it on anywhere either for like 2 to 3 months, or if it's something that I play extensively within like the first month. If I play it like 6-7 times in the first month and I'm happy with it, then I will put the deck list up. But yeah, that's just kind of what's going on behind the scenes of the Forge. Other than that, I do hope people have fun at Magic Fest Las Vegas. I will not be attending. Hopefully I will be able to start attending those sometime next year, either when it's safer or I have a little more leeway time to, save some money, because I do not have that kind of cash to just throw at a trip on a whim for reasons that I'm sure we're all well aware of. But I'm going to kick this to myself, and then I will be right back.
Hey, did you know that for as little as $1 a month, you can help support this podcast? All you have to do is go to patreon.com/commandersforge, and that is CMDR_forge. That's it. That's all I got to say about it. If you want to help support the podcast, you can go there.
Welcome back. Now, the other day I was pulling cards because I was working on Nadar Selfless Paladin Commander deck. And it kind of got to that point where I was pulling cards and just putting them into a pile. And I kind of saw this theme appear. And it led me to another deck. Adeline Resplendent Cathar is a star 4 for 1 white human knight. She has vigilance. Her power is equal to the number of creatures you control, and whenever you attack for each opponent, you create a 1/1 human creature token that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. So at first when I saw this, my first thought was, oh, tokens. And then my second thought was, well, it makes human tokens. So the gears in my head started churning a little bit. And I thought, what if we took mono white tokens, but made it mono white humans with the sub theme of tokens? And it just kind of built a deck out of that pile of cards. And I'm just going to kind of break down a couple of the different areas of the deck. But I guess I could start with the human part. So, mono white humans. The real idea started with 2 cards. Well, 2 cards past Adeline. The first one being Champion of the Parish. It's a 1/1 human soldier for 1 white mana. And whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Parish. The other one is Thalia's Lieutenant. 1/1 human soldier for a 1 and a white. And when Thalia's Lieutenant enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each other human you control. And whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. That kind of led me down the rabbit hole of play little creatures and make them big. Other human-centric stuff I'm running, Riders of Gavany, 3/3 human knight for 2 white. Vigilance, when it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, and your human creatures have protection from creatures of the chosen type. Pyre of Heroes is a 2-mana artifact that you can pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card that shares a creature type with the sacrificed creature and has converted mana cost equal to 1 plus that creature's converted mana cost. Put it onto the battlefield, shuffle your library, and then activate this ability only as a sorcery. Herald's Horn is a 3-mana artifact. When enters, you choose a creature type. It decreases the cost of those creature types by 1 generic mana. And at the beginning of your beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. Now, there are some humans that kind of mesh into other sections of the deck as well. Things like Thraben Doomsayer, which is a 2/2 human cleric for 1 white. It has tap, create a 1/1 white human creature token. And then it has Fateful Hour, so as long as you have 5 or less life, other creatures you control get +2/+2. I highly doubt that's ever going to happen. But it makes a token. Then there's things like Rally the Ranks. 1 and a white for an enchantment that when it enters, you choose a creature type, and creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1. So it feeds into the human faction, but also into the Anthem section, along with Sanctuary Lockdown, which is 2 and a white for an enchantment. Humans you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 2 and tap 2 untap humans you control to tap a creature an opponent controls. I don't see that tap ability coming up terribly often, but it's nice to have the option. And that also kind of coincides with Icon of Ancestry. It's a 3-mana artifact. When it enters, you choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1, and you can pay 3 and tap it to look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card of the chosen type from among them and put it into your hand, and you put the rest on the bottom in a random order. It's all human-centric and just trying to keep the board bigger than the opponents. And I know this deck isn't perfect, I guess would be the word for it. Namely, it doesn't have like all of the protection it could or should. Like, I only have 1 copy of Teferi's Protection, and that kind of lives full-time in Linden. But we do get stuff like Eldrazi Monument, 5-mana artifact, creatures you control get +1/+1, have flying and indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. If you can't, you sacrifice the Eldrazi Monument. Again, you're just making a ton of tokens, so it's not really that big of a difference. Caged Sun is a 6-mana artifact. When it enters, you choose a color. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+1, and whenever a land's ability adds 1 or more mana of the chosen color to your mana pool, add 1 additional mana of that color to your mana pool. Again, all of our creatures are white, including all of the tokens. We don't make anything that isn't white. It's just good. Marshal's Anthem is 2 white for an enchantment, but it has multi-kicker for 1 and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1. And when Marshal's Anthem enters the battlefield, you can return up to X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times Marshal's Anthem was kicked. Door of Destinies is a 4-mana artifact. When it comes into play, you choose a creature type. Whenever you play a spell of that type, you put a charge counter on Door of Destinies, and creatures you control get +1/+1 for each charge counter on Door of Destinies. So you get like the general gist of just, if it's an Anthem, slap it into the deck. Things like Kongming, Sleeping Dragon, Paragon of New Dawns, and Benelish Marshal. One says other white creatures you control get +1/+1, and the other 2 just say other creatures you control get +1/+1. But I also count anthems as other stuff. Things like Heliod, God of the Sun, which is my 1 token non-human in the deck. 3 and a white for a 5/6, indestructible. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature. But other creatures you control have Vigilance. And you can pay 2 white to create a 2/1 Cleric enchantment creature token. But it's the give everything you control Vigilance bit. Similar to Archetype of Courage, 1 white for a human soldier, 2/2. Creatures you control have first strike, and creatures your opponents control lose first strike. And we kind of top that off with Odric, Lunarch Marshal, 3 white, human soldier, 3/3. At the beginning of each combat, creature you control gain first strike. Till end of turn, if a creature you control has first strike, the same is true for flying, death touch, double strike, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, skulk, trample, and vigilance. Now, I know we can't hit all of those in this deck, but I do know we can hit first strike, flying, double strike, indestructible, lifelink, and vigilance, I believe. Without going through the deck list, I can't be entirely sure that we can't hit any of the other ones. But mono white doesn't get all of the keywords. But then there's the token theme. And the token theme kind of what inspired this deck started with Call the Coppercoats. 2 white instant, it has Strive. This spell costs 1 white more to cast for each target beyond the first. But you choose any number of target opponents and you create X 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures those opponents control. And that did kind of lead me down the rabbit hole of making human tokens versus making non-human tokens, because there are a few things that don't make human tokens that I still wanted to include, namely Hero of Bladehold and Elspeth Sun's Champion. Hero of Bladehold is 2 white for a human knight. It's a 3/4 with Battlecry. And that means whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 to end of turn. But whenever Hero of Bladehold attacks, you put 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. And then Elspeth Sun's Champion, 4 white for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker, Elspeth. +1, you put 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. You can -3 to destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. And the -7 is you get an emblem with creatures you control at +2/+2 and flying. I will say, Elspeth is probably the number 1 Planeswalker that I've alted the most. Mostly because she can create so much protection for herself, and then when they do start playing threatening stuff that can wipe the board, you just take a turn to -3 her, and then just keep pumping tokens out. Regardless, you can't really do a token list without including Skullclamp. And yes, I do understand the downside of Skullclamp in a deck like this. Skullclamp is a 1 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever the equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, and the equip is 1. And somebody I played against asked me if I was running Leon and Shikari specifically for the Skullclamp, and no, I'm not. And I made that decision because mostly when something enters my battlefield, it's going to be bigger than a 1/1. Heck, it's going to be a lot of times bigger than a 2/2. Which is part of the reason why I didn't put in Mentor of the Meek. Because a lot of my stuff is going to enter above 2 power. Just, it didn't make any sense to add anything more than Skullclamp that would kind of be a nombo with the type of deck I was building. But Cathar's Crusade definitely gets out of hand. It's a 3 white for an enchantment, But whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now, when Adeline attacks and she puts 3 tokens into play, each of those tokens enter at the same time. They all see each other, which means they all enter with 3 +1/+1 counters on them, and they put 3 +1/+1 counters on everything else. Unless you're running something like Anointed Procession, which is 3 and a white for an enchantment that says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. I could be wrong about how I usually play this, but I do believe it, since Adeline creates the tokens tapped and attacking, all of the tokens, even the ones from the Anointed Procession triggering, would also enter tapped and attacking. But if you have Anointed Procession and Cathar's Crusade out at the same time, that is 6 creatures entering, which at that point could just end a game. Although the one place where this deck does kind of struggle is getting damage through. And I don't know how I would really add trample. I don't know. I'll have to look into some stuff. I mean, I could do it with equipment, but I don't necessarily want to run a ton of equipment in this deck. I think I have like 3 at this point, and I feel like that's enough. But the last card I want to talk about is Increasing Devotion. 3 white for a sorcery, and it creates 5 1/1 white human creature tokens, and if the spell was cast from a graveyard, you create 10 of those tokens instead. Now, it has that text because it has Flashback for 7 white, which means you may cast this card from your graveyard for its flashback cost, and then exile it. It's just, it's been sitting in a box because I never had anywhere I wanted to play it, because I couldn't really justify it anywhere else. But it makes essentially 15 human tokens. And that just kind of works with the theme. Yeah, that's Adeline. She is my 4th mono white deck. I know, I'm becoming a monster. My first one was Linden, which anybody that's been listening for a while knows that Linden is kind of my baby. And she got built to prove that mono white has a place at the table. And then after that, I decided to crack into CEDH with mono white. And there I'm playing Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and it's stacks and taxes list. So yes, Thalia does increase the cost on my own artifacts and stuff, but I don't care, because the whole goal of the deck is to slow everybody down. And then, again, I was pulling stuff to build Nadar, which is almost done, but I'm waiting for a couple cards in the mail. And that's from playing against a Nadar deck. Parker, if you listen to this, like, you're responsible for that deck. And then building that led me to building this one. Adeline just kind of spoke to me. But yeah, I think that'll do it. All the normal stuff. Wherever you're listening, give it a like, give it a follow, hit the bell if you're on the YouTubes for notifications. Everything about me is in my link tree, although I do need to link my Architect on my link tree now that I think about it. There's still a link to the GoFundMe to try and get, the IRS off my back before they steal all the money out of my paychecks. But yeah, I think that'll do it. And I will see you next time. That brings us to the end of the podcast. I would like to thank Nate and Erica Jacobs for designing my logo, and Cody Malpe and Ian Foss for allowing me to use a sample of music from their band, The Crypt. The podcast can be found on YouTube by searching Commander's Forge. The podcast is Commander's Forge, that is CMDR_Forge on Twitter. I can be found on Twitter at BentzMr, that is BENTZMR. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, here's to fun games and sick plays.